Snow fell in heavy sheets across the mountain road, swallowing everything in silence. Inside a half-buried car, two young twins clung to each other, tiny hands trembling, breaths fogging up the frozen windows. Time was running out. Then, out of nowhere, headlights cut through the storm. At the wheel was a man whose wealth had built him a life of luxury, but what he chose to do next would change his life far more than theirs. And the twins, thank you, it would leave even a hardened millionaire in tears. If you love true, emotional stories that remind us of the power of kindness, make sure you hit that like button. Subscribe for more heart-touching moments, and share this video with someone who could use a little warmth today. Snowstorms have a way of transforming the world. One moment, the landscape is peaceful, almost magical, the kind I've seen children dream about when building snowmen or racing sleds down a hill. But in a matter of hours, that same snow can turn into a silent trap, a cage of white where roads vanish, cars disappear, and even the strongest hearts feel fear creeping in. That's exactly what happened to 8-year-old twins Emily and Ethan. They had been on their way home from visiting their grandmother in the countryside, buckled safely in the back seat of their family's car. Their laughter, full of energy and innocence, echoed against the windows as they made up silly games to pass the time. But as the afternoon slipped into evening, the sky darkened, and the gentle flakes turned into a furious storm. Their mother, struggling to see through the windshield, gripped the wheel tightly. The wipers slapped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the ice and snow. Then it happened. A sharp curve, the squeal of tires, and the world tipped sideways. In seconds, their car slid off the road, crunching into a snowbank. The engine stalled. The lights flickered, then died. Silence, except for the howling wind. At first, the twins thought it was an adventure. Ethan whispered, "It's like we're in a snow cave." Emily giggled nervously, but when the cold began seeping through their jackets, the adventure no longer felt like fun. Their mother tried calling for help, but the storm had swallowed cell signals. The battery warning blinked on the dashboard. Minutes dragged into an hour. The snow piled higher, covering the car's roof, pressing against the windows. The twins huddled close, their small hands clutching each other as though that grip could hold back the fear rising inside them. And out in the distance, unknown to them, a pair of headlights had just appeared. James Harrington was the kind of man whose name carried weight in glossy magazines and business circles. At just 52, he owned properties across Europe, a chain of luxury hotels, and a fleet of cars that most people would only ever see on posters. To the outside world, he had it all: success, influence, and the kind of wealth that could buy just about anything. But wealth, as James had discovered, didn't always buy happiness. His mansion echoed with silence, his dinners were eaten alone, and his family connections had slowly withered under the pressure of his endless work schedule. For all his riches, he often found himself staring out of his penthouse window at night, wondering if this was truly the life he had dreamed of as a boy. That winter, James had taken what he called a thinking drive. He enjoyed escaping the city in one of his lesser-known cars, something simple enough not to attract attention. It was his way of reminding himself what it felt like to be ordinary, to breathe in crisp air far from boardrooms and flashing cameras. But that evening, his little detour became far more than a retreat. The storm caught him off guard. Snow lashed across the windshield, and soon he found himself inching along unfamiliar country roads, guided only by the faint glow of his headlights. Most people in his position would have turned back, found the safety of a hotel, or called for a driver. But James was stubborn. Something about the solitude of that storm pulled him in. And then he saw it, a faint shape on the roadside. A car, almost buried, with just the curve of its roof breaking the white blanket of snow. James slowed, his gut tightening. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside. James pulled his car to the side, the tires crunching against the icy shoulder. For a moment, he just sat there, staring through the snow-streaked glass at the half-buried vehicle. His breath fogged the windshield. His heartbeat quickened. Should he call for help? Wait for emergency services? The thought barely formed before he shook his head. By the time anyone arrived, whoever was inside could be in serious danger. He grabbed his coat, shoved open the door, and was instantly swallowed by the storm. The wind slapped at his face like a wall of ice. Snow stung his eyes. Each step toward the stranded car felt like trudging through quicksand. He reached the driver's side window and wiped away the frost with his glove. Inside, dim shapes moved. A woman slumped at the wheel, two small faces peering back with wide, frightened eyes. Children. Jamesy's chest tightened. Without another thought, he yanked at the door handle. Frozen solid. He tried again, teeth clenched, pulling until his arm ached. Nothing. The storm howled louder, as if mocking his effort. He circled to the back, his shoes sinking deep into the drift. He kicked at the snow, clearing a path to the rear door. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from urgency. Finally, the handle gave way with a sharp crack, and the door creaked open. "Hey!" he shouted over the wind, his voice rough but steady. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The twins blinked up at him, their faces pale, lips quivering. Emily clutched Ethan's hand tighter. For the first time in hours, hope flickered in their eyes. James crawled inside, the cold air biting at his skin. He placed a reassuring hand on the mother's shoulder. Her eyes fluttered, weak but conscious. "We're getting you out," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. And in that moment, for the first time in years, James Harrington's wealth meant nothing. What mattered was life. Their lives. The storm finally broke by morning. What had been a world of white chaos just hours before now lay quiet, still and heavy with snow. Inside a small mountain clinic, James sat in the waiting room, his coat still damp, his hair matted from melted ice. He wasn't used to places like this. Fluorescent lights buzzing, nurses hustling in and out, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. But he didn't care. He only cared about the three people he had pulled from that frozen trap. When the doctor finally stepped out, James stood so quickly his chair toppled over. "They'll be all right," the doctor said, a smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. Relief surged through James like a tidal wave. A nurse led him into the recovery room. The twins sat upright in their beds, wrapped in thick blankets, sipping hot cocoa from paper cups. Their mother, pale but smiling, held their hands. When they saw James, the children's eyes lit up. Emily whispered something to her brother, and Ethan nodded shyly. Together, they slipped off their beds and shuffled over to him. Their small hands reached for his, and Ethan looked up with trembling lips. "Thank you for saving our mom." Emily's voice followed, barely more than a whisper. "You're our hero." For a man who had signed billion-dollar contracts, who had stood in rooms with world leaders, nothing had ever struck him as deeply as those words. He felt his throat tighten, his eyes sting. James Harrington, the man who thought he had everything, suddenly realized he had been missing the one thing money could never buy, a moment that gave life meaning. Tears blurred his vision as he knelt to their level. "No," he said softly, his voice breaking. "You two are the brave ones." The twins hugged him, their tiny arms barely reaching around his frame. And in that embrace, James felt something he hadn't felt in years: warmth, belonging, and the unmistakable truth that sometimes the greatest treasures in life are found in the most unexpected storms. Life is a way of surprising us. James Harrington set out on a quiet drive, but instead he found two children who changed his heart forever. Their gratitude reminded him, and all of us, that heroism isn't measured by money, power, or fame. It's measured by compassion, by the moments when we choose to act. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us share more of these powerful stories. Subscribe for more true, emotional tales that remind us of the good still left in this world. And if you know someone who needs hope today, share this video with them. Because sometimes the smallest thank you can leave the biggest mark.